Hello, my name is Julian, and this presentation will cover the Fermentation Station program at REAP Climate Center. Fermentation Station is one of REAP's regenerative labs and exhibits. This program is in its early stages, exploring possibilities and routes to impact from plan discovery to certification and job placement. The program's chief goal is to engage, educate, and train individuals in the process and application of fermentation for food waste diversion and soil remediation. REAP Climate Center is a nonprofit that specializes in ecological experiences and climate jobs. Our vision is a world where all human built systems align with nature, where meeting human needs enriches the world around us. Our mission is to make climate change mitigation approachable by providing ecological experiences and climate job pathways. We do this in a regenerative context, connecting play and discovery to training and certifications. The Fermentation Station is part of REAP's regenerative labs and exhibits. See the Fermentation Station program page for details about our current status. At REAP, our aim is to use and teach bokashi as a soil amendment and an effective means for capturing and reintegrating organic waste. So, what is fermentation? In general, it is when sugars are transformed chemically by microorganisms. That's an exceedingly broad definition, almost too broad. The most common way we encounter fermentation is in a food science context, where it means any process where microbes produce desirable transformations in a food. Fermentation has been employed by humans for over 9,000 years, although only recently in that time span did we learn how it really works. Earliest records point to fermentation being used in 7000 BC in Neolithic China. Fermentation is one of the cornerstone technologies in food preparation and preservation for all of humanity. From beer to bread to kimchi, fermented foods have deep cultural and historical significance. REAP is particularly interested in fermentation as a way of managing food waste. The process of fermenting compost is called bokashi from Japanese. Bokashi composting, or fermented compost, is unique for a number of reasons, but primarily because it is an anaerobic or airless process. Bokashi fermentation is associated with specific microbes, of which there are tens and even hundreds, but predominantly with lactobacillus, or LAB. The process is pretty simple. You add food scraps and LAB inoculated bran, or liquid, to a bin, seal it, and then wait a couple of weeks. Afterwards, you have a fermented bin of useful compost. It has the benefit at this stage of being able to receive more inputs than traditional hot composting. You can ferment dairy, meats, and almost any kitchen waste besides large quantities of grease and oil. Bokashi also has the benefit of being more adaptable to different scales. Where a hot compost pile requires at least 1 cubic yard, 3 by 3 by 3 feet, of material to function, bokashi requires just a bucket. As a result, home composting is easier with bokashi than almost any alternative because you can do all your bokashi in a small bucket. It can even be done in an apartment, although some careful monitoring and additional steps prior to use are necessary. Just because bokashi can be small doesn't mean it can't be big, though. The bottom photo shows an industrial scale bokashi windrow, which instead of a sealed bucket, uses a burrito of tarp to keep the space anaerobic. Bokashi is just as useful on massive scales as it is for home composting. Another benefit of bokashi is that it is a lossless process. That means that throughout the process of composting, no energy or mass is lost to off-gassing or other causes. In hot compost, as shown in the right two columns of this chart, about 50% of organic matter is lost during the composting process. In these trials, as much as 70% of carbon inputted was lost and 10% of nitrogen. That means two things. One, much of the energy that we're trying to return to our soils and our plants is being lost in the process. And two, that carbon is going into the atmosphere. With Bokashi's airtight process, no matter is lost or the loss is negligible. The left two columns show carbon and OM losses of less than 6%, which helps demonstrate that lossless trait of Bokashi. If the goal is to recycle energy from our food and industrial waste back into the earth, soil, and ecosystem, Bokashi is a good way to go. As I mentioned earlier, Bokashi is a cold process. On the left, you can see a chart showing the temperatures of a hot compost pile and Bokashi. After an early period where the microbial environment is in flux, prior to the predominance of the anaerobic LAB microbes, the pile cools. It's worth noting here that where hot compost sterilizes its content through sustained high temperatures, bokashi sterilizes through acidity. That means that applying bokashi is not as easy as applying compost to soil, since directly adding bokashi to a planted bed will kill the plants. However, by either diluting the bokashi tea, adding bokashi to soil 2 weeks prior to planting, or adding it to your compost mix, you can mitigate the risk of bokashi. And the results are well worth it, as the chart on the right showed. In a 3-year comparative trial, Agriton found that bokashi amended soils produced significantly higher soil organic matter and nitrogen content and stock. These results are really significant if our goal is to improve plant growth and soil biodiversity. So, what does the bokashi market look like? The bokashi market is definitely broken into two sections: inputs, such as dry inoculated bran, which is key for making the compost, and outputs. For outputs, both bokashi compost, what some would call biopulp, and bokashi tea can be sold, either separately or together as a mix. One seller cites prices of $1,000 per ton for biopulp, but separated products may sell for more on a per weight basis. This graphic shows many of the distributed benefits of bokashi in various sectors. You can see that for agriculture, its primary values are as a high quality soil amendment, reducing vehicle use in production, which in turn reduces GHG emissions. Its quick processing time of about 2 weeks and it being a lossless process are other benefits. For home use, the quick turnaround, small footprint, and use in a garden context make it more approachable than hot composting. It can also process almost all food inputs. For soil amendment, we see, as discussed, high soil organic matter, high nitrogen, and greatly enhanced biodiversity from bokashi compost. GHG emissions are also reduced across the board through reduced vehicle use, waste diversion, and the lack of carbon off-gassing. One of the most common things people ask when they hear about bokashi is, if this is so good, then why aren't we doing this all the time instead of hot compost? And that's a great question. There are a few reasons outlined in this pros and cons list. As you can see, we've already talked about all of these pros, but for bokashi, it does have some cons. For one thing, EM input is not inexpensive. It's not cheap, but it also isn't expensive. So you need a lot of it to make a lot of bokashi. And on the scale of industrial composting, having that input requirement can be a big hurdle. Additionally, the highly acidic result is slightly more difficult to use than regular compost. You can't just lay it on top of a bed you're about to plant or one that you've just seeded. You need to be thoughtful about how you integrate bokashi compost products into your soil. Traditional composting has the benefit of being immediately usable by contrast. It also has the benefit of requiring no inputs, other than the food and waste that you're trying to compost. Finally, there are recognized FDA standards and standards from other certifying organizations about how to safely make compost, which don't exist as much for bokashi. These are just some of the reasons why one might choose compost over bokashi or bokashi over hot compost. But ultimately, neither one of these is a perfect solution, and the best solutions will use both in tandem with yet more solutions. REAP's programs reflect this holistic approach to soil and climate solutions, and we recognize that there is no one solution to climate change or soil amendment. Used in conjunction with hot composting, vermicomposting, or other methods, bokashi can act as a cornerstone solution for soil biodiversity. Along with direct uses, it can be integrated into compost building processes and other methods in regenerative agriculture. At REAP, bokashi plays a central role in our soil strategy. We are healing our soils with all the tools at our disposal, and with bokashi's significant improvement of soil organic matter, it's key for how we think about doing that. Bokashi enables us to walk the talk of regeneration and demonstrate the capacity of this for small and large scales. We can generate interest in bokashi composting and educate individuals about regeneration and waste diversion through this technique because it is so friendly to small scales and requires little startup. It is also a crucial case study of an economically viable but emergent field where developing workforce, knowledge, and techniques is highly important. On that note, the needs for bokashi as an industry right now that REAP can meet are primarily buy-in from farmers and residents. To achieve this buy-in and drive wide-scale impact, we need education, resources, trainings, and applied examples to show people not only how to do bokashi composting, but that it's well worth doing. This feeds directly into REAP's vision for regenerative systems change through workforce development. So, come volunteer, explore our workshops, or help us expand our workforce development programs in this exciting and impactful field. We are excited to be seeking individuals, experts, and organizations that are interested in this important work. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and please visit our website at reapcenter.org and reach out with any questions.